The gunshot echoed through the dusty plains of Willow Creek, Montana, as Rosalie Sinclair huddled in the back of the dilapidated stagecoach, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild mustang. The year was 1885, and she had nowhere left to run. Her crimson dress, once beautiful and pristine, now bore the grime of 3 days' travel, and her auburn hair had fallen loose from its careful arrangement. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the town's only saloon, the weathered sign reading "The Dusty Trail" swinging in the autumn breeze. "End of the line, miss," the driver called, his voice gravelly from years of dust and tobacco. "Willow Creek. Not much, but it's something." Rosalie stepped down from the coach, her leather boots landing in the mud with a soft squelch. She clutched her small valise, containing all that remained of her former life in Boston. The town spread before her, a collection of wooden buildings and dirt roads, nothing like the bustling metropolis she had fled. As she made her way toward the general store, whispers followed her like shadows. "That must be the Sinclair woman," heard She's Trouble, "running from something back east. They say she ain't welcome here." Rosalie kept her chin up, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. She had hoped news wouldn't travel this far west, but gossip, it seemed, moved faster than stagecoaches. The general store's bell tinkled as she entered, and the chatter inside immediately ceased. Every eye turned to her, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The storekeeper, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache, folded his arms across his chest. "We don't want no trouble here, miss," he said flatly. "Your kind ain't welcome in Willow Creek." Rosalie opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the door opened behind her. A tall figure blocked the sunlight, casting a long shadow across the wooden floor. The room seemed to hold its breath. "They say she's not welcome," the storekeeper repeated, addressing the newcomer. "Then I'll welcome her myself," came the deep, steady reply. Rosalie turned to face her defender. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair fell in waves beneath a well-worn Stetson, and a star-shaped badge gleamed on his chest. "Sheriff Samuel Evans," he introduced himself, tipping his hat slightly. "And you must be Miss Sinclair." "Rosalie," she confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rosalie Sinclair." Sheriff Evans surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on each hostile face until they averted their eyes. "Miss Sinclair is entitled to the same courtesy as any other visitor to our town." "I trust you'll all remember that." The storekeeper shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff," we heard. "I don't much care what you heard, Hank," Samuel cut him off. "Gossip ain't evidence, and in this town we don't condemn folks without cause." He turned to Rosalie. "Do you have lodgings, Miss Sinclair?" She shook her head. "I was hoping to inquire about rooms at the hotel. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house would be more suitable," he said. "Allow me to escort you there." Outside, the afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, turning the main street into a corridor of heat and dust. Samuel walked beside Rosalie, matching his long strides to her shorter ones. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But I don't need your charity, Sheriff. I can fend for myself." His lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "I have no doubt, Miss Sinclair. But even the most capable individuals need allies now and then." "Is that what you are, my ally?" "I'm the law in Willow Creek," he replied simply. "And the law protects everyone equally." He paused. "Though I admit, I'm curious what brings a Boston society lady to our humble town." Rosalie tensed. "Who says I'm from Boston? Your accent for one, your clothing for another, and—" he hesitated. "I read newspapers, Miss Sinclair, even the Eastern ones." Cold fear washed over her. "Then you know." "I know what was printed, I don't know the truth." They arrived at a neat two-story house with a small garden out front. A sign reading Peterson's Boarding House hung beside the door. "Mrs. Peterson is a fair woman," Samuel said. "She won't turn you away based on rumors." Before Rosalie could respond, the door opened to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Sheriff Evans, what brings you by?" Her gaze fell on Rosalie, curiosity evident in her expression. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Miss Rosalie Sinclair. She's new to town and in need of lodging." The older woman's eyes widened slightly. "Sinclair, not the Miss Sinclair requires a room," Samuel interrupted firmly. "I vouch for her character." Mrs. Peterson looked between them, then nodded slowly. "Well, if the sheriff vouches for you, that's good enough for me. Come in, dear. I've got a nice room on the second floor with a view of the mountains." Relief flooded through Rosalie. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I won't be any trouble." "Course not," the landlady replied, though her eyes held questions. "Room and board is $2 a week, paid in advance." Rosalie opened her purse and counted out the money, aware of Samuel watching her. When Mrs. Peterson excused herself to prepare the room, Rosalie turned to the sheriff. "Why are you helping me?" she asked bluntly. Samuel studied her for a long moment. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, Miss Sinclair, even those running from their past." "And what makes you think I'm running?" His eyes, shrewd and perceptive, held hers. "No one comes to Willow Creek unless they're running to something or from something, and you don't strike me as someone running toward a mining town in Montana territory." Rosalie looked away. "You don't know anything about me." "No," he agreed, "but I'd like to." He tipped his hat again. "Good day, Miss Sinclair. Should you need anything, the sheriff's office is just down the street." As he turned to leave, Rosalie called after him. "Sheriff Evans." He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once, and then he was gone, leaving Rosalie alone with her thoughts and the weight of secrets she had carried all the way from Boston. The room Mrs. Peterson showed her was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. True to the landlady's word, the window offered a spectacular view of the distant mountains, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Mrs. Peterson informed her. "We eat together family style. I hope that suits you." "It's perfect," Rosalie assured her. "Thank you for your kindness." When the door closed behind Mrs. Peterson, Rosalie sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally claiming her. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to weep quietly, tears of relief mingling with tears of fear. She had escaped Boston, but for how long? And could this small town, with its suspicious inhabitants, truly offer the refuge she sought? Only time would tell. And Sheriff Samuel Evans, with his storm-gray eyes and unexpected kindness, had just become a complication she hadn't anticipated. The next morning, Rosalie woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee wafting up from downstairs. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, a deep blue cotton with minimal embellishment, and pinned her hair in a practical style. If she was to make a new start in Willow Creek, she would need to adapt to its ways. Breakfast at Mrs. Peterson's table was a subdued affair. Besides Rosalie, there were 3 other boarders: Mr. Jenkins, a silver-haired surveyor for the railroad, Miss Abigail Wells, the town's schoolteacher, and Mr. Timothy Ford, a young bank clerk with spectacles and a nervous disposition. They regarded Rosalie with varying degrees of curiosity, but no one mentioned the rumors that had preceded her arrival. "Will you be staying long in Willow Creek, Miss Sinclair?" Miss Wells inquired politely as she buttered a biscuit. "I'm not certain," Rosalie replied. "I suppose it depends on whether I can find employment." Mrs. Peterson perked up at this. "What sort of skills do you have, dear?" Rosalie hesitated. Her education had prepared her to be a society wife, not a working woman. "I can read and write quite well. I'm proficient in arithmetic, and I play the piano. I also have some experience with bookkeeping." This last part was stretching the truth. She had merely observed her father's business dealings, but she was a quick learner. Mrs. Peterson considered. "Mr. Tanner at the mercantile might need help with his ledgers. His eyes ain't what they used to be. And Mrs. Wallace at the dress shop sometimes needs an extra hand with fine stitching. The newspaper might be another option," Mr. Jenkins added. "Old Thompson's been looking for someone who can write more than just mining news and cattle prices." Hope bloomed in Rosalie's chest. Perhaps she could forge a place for herself here after all. After breakfast, she set out to explore the town and inquire about employment. Willow Creek was larger than it had appeared from the stagecoach. Beyond the main street lay several residential areas, a small church, a schoolhouse, and various businesses catering to the needs of the townspeople and the surrounding ranches. The mercantile was her first stop. Mr. Tanner, the storekeeper who had been so unwelcoming the previous day, was less hostile but still wary. "Sheriff vouches for you, that's something," he admitted grudgingly. "But I don't need help with my books. Got my nephew Common from Helena next month for that." The dress shop yielded similar results. Mrs. Wallace, a thin woman with pinched features, barely let Rosalie finish explaining her inquiry before dismissing her. "I heard about you," she said, her tone frosty. "Don't need your kind of trouble around my respectable customers." By midday, Rosalie's spirits had sunk lower with each rejection. She stood on the boardwalk outside the Willow Creek Gazette office, gathering her courage for one more attempt, when a commotion down the street caught her attention. A group of cowboys had ridden into town, their horses kicking up dust as they dismounted in front of the saloon. They were loud and boisterous, clearly looking forward to spending their wages on whiskey and whatever other entertainments the establishment offered. One of the men, noticing Rosalie, nudged his companion and pointed in her direction. They exchanged words, laughing, then began sauntering toward her. Rosalie tensed, preparing to retreat into the newspaper office. "Well, well," the taller of the two drawled as they approached. "You must be the Eastern lady everyone's talking about, prettier than they said." "Excuse me," Rosalie said firmly, attempting to step around them. The second man blocked her path. "Now don't be like that, darlin'. We're just bein' friendly. Ain't that right, Jake?" "Real friendly," Jake agreed, his gaze traveling up and down Rosalie's figure in a way that made her skin crawl. "Heard you might be looking for work. The Double B Ranch could use a woman with refinement." "I'm not interested," Rosalie replied, her heart racing. "Please let me pass." Jake reached out to touch her arm. "Come on now. I believe the lady asked you to step aside." Sheriff Evans materialized beside them, his expression calm but his eyes hard as flint. The cowboys straightened immediately, their swagger diminishing under his stern gaze. "Sheriff," Jake acknowledged, tipping his hat. "Just mackin' conversation with the newcomer." "Miss Sinclair doesn't seem interested in your conversation," Samuel replied evenly. "I suggest you gentlemen continue on to the saloon before your thirst gets you into trouble." The men exchanged glances, then shrugged and backed away. "No harm meant, Sheriff," the second cowboy said. "Just bein' sociable." When they were out of earshot, Samuel turned to Rosalie. "Are you all right, Miss Sinclair?" "Perfectly fine," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I could have handled them." "I've no doubt," he replied, and this time she was certain there was a smile tugging at his lips. "But why handle them alone when I was right across the street?" Rosalie sighed. "I appreciate your assistance, Sheriff, but I can't rely on you to rescue me every time someone in town decides to be unpleasant. I need to stand on my own feet." Fair enough, Samuel conceded. Have you had any luck finding employment? She shook her head. It seems my reputation preceded me. Samuel frowned. That's unfortunate. What were you hoping to find? Anything respectable that would allow me to support myself. I was about to try the newspaper. Thompson's a fair man, but he's out of town until next week. Samuel considered for a moment. I might have another option for you. My office is in desperate need of organization. Records, correspondence, filing, it's all a mess. I've been meaning to hire someone to sort it out, but haven't found the right person. Rosalie eyed him suspiciously. Are you offering me a job out of pity, Sheriff? I'm offering you a job because I need the help and you need the work, he corrected her. It would be temporary, a few weeks at most, but it would give you time to establish yourself in town and find something more permanent. Rosalie weighed her options. Working closely with the sheriff might draw more attention than she wanted, but she needed the income. And there was something about Samuel Evans that made her feel safe. What would the position entail exactly? She asked. Organizing 15 years' worth of paperwork into something resembling a filing system. Responding to correspondence from the territorial marshal's office. Perhaps helping me draft reports. He gestured toward the sheriff's office. Would you like to see what you'd be getting yourself into? Curiosity piqued. Rosalie nodded and followed him across the street to a modest building with sheriff painted on the front window. Inside, a desk dominated the main room, flanked by a gun rack and a small wood stove. 2 cells with iron bars occupied the back wall, currently empty. And everywhere on the desk, on shelves, in stacks on the floor, were papers, files, and ledgers in various states of disarray. Good heavens, Rosalie murmured. You weren't exaggerating. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, looking sheepish. I'm better at keeping the peace than keeping records. My deputy helps when he can, but Caleb's more interested in patrolling than paperwork. I can see why you need assistance, Rosalie said, already mentally cataloging the work ahead. When would you want me to start? Tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. I can pay 50 cents a day. It wasn't much, but it would cover her room and board at Mrs. Peterson's with a little left over. I accept, Rosalie said, extending her hand. Samuel took it, his large hand engulfing her smaller one. His skin was warm and calloused, the hand of a man accustomed to hard work despite his position of authority. Something fluttered in Rosalie's stomach, a sensation she quickly suppressed. Thank you for the opportunity, Sheriff, she said formally, withdrawing her hand. Samuel, he corrected her. If we're going to be working together, you might as well use my given name. Samuel, she repeated, testing the name. Then I suppose you should call me Rosalie. A genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features into something quite handsome. Rosalie it is, then. As she walked back to the boarding house that afternoon, Rosalie felt lighter than she had in months. She had secured employment, even if temporary, and made a potential ally in the sheriff. It was a start. But as she passed the telegraph office, she noticed the operator watching her with undisguised interest. A chill ran down her spine. How long before someone in Willow Creek received a wire from Boston, confirming the worst of the rumors? How long before her past caught up with her? Not long enough, she feared. Not nearly long enough. The sheriff's office was exactly as chaotic as it had appeared the day before. Rosalie stood in the doorway at precisely 8 o'clock the next morning, surveying the challenge before her. Samuel was already there, hat hung on a peg by the door, sleeves rolled up to his elbows as he cleared space on a small side desk that would be hers. Good morning, he greeted her. I hope you slept well. Well enough, Rosalie replied, removing her shawl. I was planning my attack on this mess. Samuel chuckled. A strategic approach would be wise. Where do you want to begin? Rosalie moved to the center of the room, turning slowly to take in the full scope of the disorder. First, I need to understand your current system, if there is one. System might be a generous term, Samuel admitted. Most recent reports are on the desk. Older ones tend to migrate to the floor. Correspondence from the territorial governor is somewhere. He gestured vaguely toward a teetering stack of papers. I see. Rosalie rolled up her own sleeves. Well, the first step is to sort everything by category and date. Then we can establish a proper filing system. For the next few hours, they worked side by side, sorting papers into piles: criminal reports, land disputes, correspondence, wanted posters, and miscellaneous town business. Samuel proved to be a surprisingly amiable colleague, his dry humor emerging as they uncovered increasingly absurd documents buried in the chaos. Here's a complaint about Widow Jenkins' goat eating Mrs. Wallace's prize roses, Rosalie said, holding up a yellowed paper. Dated 1877. Samuel laughed. That goat was the terror of Willow Creek for years, eventually escaped and joined a herd of mountain sheep if the rumors are to be believed. And this, Rosalie held up another document, a request for the sheriff to mediate a dispute over a pair of trousers. Ah, the infamous Callahan Wright trouser debacle of '81, Samuel said with mock solemnity. Two miners claiming the same pair after a mix-up at the laundry nearly came to bloodshed. How did you resolve it? Cut them in half, Samuel said with a straight face. When Rosalie's eyes widened, he laughed. I'm teasing. I made them draw straws, and the loser got a voucher for the mercantile. As the morning progressed, Rosalie found herself increasingly at ease in Samuel's company. He was nothing like the men she had known in Boston. No pretense, no hidden agendas. What you saw was what you got with Sheriff Samuel Evans, and what she saw was a good man doing his best for his town. Around noon, the door opened to admit a young man in his early 20s, wearing a deputy's badge and a wide grin. Caleb, Samuel greeted him. Right on time. This is Miss Sinclair, who's bravely taken on the task of organizing our chaos. Deputy Caleb Reynolds, the young man introduced himself, tipping his hat. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Sinclair. Boss has been threatening to hire someone to clean up his mess for years. The pleasure is mine, Deputy, Rosalie replied. I'm happy to help. Caleb, can you handle things here for an hour? Samuel asked. I promised to show Miss Sinclair the town properly, since her first impressions weren't exactly welcoming. Rosalie looked at him in surprise. This was the first she'd heard of such a plan. No trouble at all, Caleb said. Town's quiet today. Samuel retrieved his hat and gestured to the door. Shall we, Miss Sinclair? I thought we might get some lunch at Clara's cafe. Best apple pie in the territory. Outside, the sun had burned away the morning chill, leaving the air warm and fragrant with the scent of pine from the nearby mountains. Rosalie walked beside Samuel, acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople they passed. You didn't mention a tour, she said quietly. I thought you might appreciate getting out of that dusty office for a while, he replied. And I wanted to introduce you to some of the more welcoming residents of Willow Creek, people whose opinions matter. Clara's Cafe was a cheerful establishment with checkered tablecloths and windows that let in streams of sunlight. A plump, middle-aged woman with rosy cheeks greeted them warmly. Sheriff, twice in 1 week I'm honored, she teased, then turned curious eyes to Rosalie. And who's this lovely lady? Clara, meet Miss Rosalie Sinclair, newly arrived from the East. She's helping me organize the office. Samuel guided Rosalie to a table by the window. Miss Sinclair, this is Clara Wilson, purveyor of the finest meals in Montana territory. Oh, go on with you, Clara laughed, but she looked pleased. What'll it be today? 2 of your special sandwiches and 2 slices of apple pie, Samuel ordered. And coffee, please. When Clara bustled away, Rosalie raised an eyebrow. You ordered for me. Samuel looked chagrined. I apologize. That was presumptuous. Would you prefer something else? No, I'm sure your selection will be fine, She hesitated. In Boston, men often made decisions for women without consultation. I had hoped the West might be different. Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying her. In some ways it is. Women out here often run businesses, own property, make their own way. Necessity breeds independence. But old habits die hard, and I apologize for falling into one. Rosalie nodded, accepting his apology. Tell me about Willow Creek. How long have you been sheriff? 7 years, Samuel replied. I came west after the war, fought for the Union, and tried my hand at prospecting. Wasn't much good at finding gold, but I had a knack for settling disputes among miners. The previous sheriff took me on as deputy, and when he retired, the town council asked me to step in. And do you enjoy it? Being responsible for an entire town? Samuel considered the question. Most days. I believe in justice, in protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's not always easy, and sometimes the law isn't as clear-cut as I'd like, but I sleep better knowing I've done what I can to keep the peace. Clara returned with their food, thick sandwiches of roast beef, cheese, and some kind of tangy sauce, accompanied by small dishes of pickles and sliced apples. The aroma made Rosalie's stomach growl, reminding her she hadn't eaten much at breakfast. This looks wonderful, she told Clara sincerely. Eat up, dear. You're too thin, Clara instructed, then lowered her voice. Don't you mind what some folks are saying? Any friend of the sheriff's is a friend of mine. As they ate, Samuel pointed out various people entering the cafe, giving Rosalie a brief history of each. The elderly gentleman with the impressive mustache was Judge Hamilton, who presided over the county court. The woman in the blue dress was Mrs. Foster, who organized the town's social events and charity drives. The young couple in the corner were newlyweds, the husband a rancher from outside town, the wife a former schoolteacher. You know everyone, Rosalie observed. It's my job, Samuel replied. But more than that, these are good people, salt of the earth. They may be suspicious of newcomers initially, but once they accept you, they'll stand by you through anything. Even a scandal? Rosalie asked quietly. Samuel's gray eyes met hers steadily. Depends on the scandal, I suppose, and on whether there's truth behind it. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken questions. Finally, Rosalie looked away. The pie is delicious, she said, changing the subject. Samuel allowed the diversion. Told you. Clara won blue ribbons at the territorial fair 3 years running. After lunch, Samuel showed her the rest of the town, the small lending library housed in the back of the church, the newly built schoolhouse where classes would resume next month, the bathhouse, where, for 25 cents, one could enjoy the luxury of hot water and scented soap. And over there, Samuel pointed to a sturdy brick building at the end of the main street, is the Willow Creek Bank, newly constructed last year after the old wooden one burned down. As they approached the bank, the door opened and a well-dressed man emerged. He was perhaps 50, with silver at his temples and a neatly trimmed beard. His suit, while not ostentatious, was clearly of fine quality. Ah, Sheriff Evans, the man greeted them. Just the man I wanted to see. We've had a report of cattle rustling near the Peterson property. Nothing confirmed yet, but Mr. Taylor is quite concerned. I'll ride out there tomorrow morning, Mr. Hargrove, Samuel promised. Miss Sinclair, allow me to introduce Edward Hargrove, president of the Willow Creek Bank and our town mayor. Mr. Hargrove, this is Miss Rosalie Sinclair. The banker's eyes widened slightly in recognition of her name, but his manners were impeccable. "Miss Sinclair, a pleasure. I understand you're new to our community." "Yes, sir," Rosalie replied. "Just arrived 2 days ago. From Boston, I believe." When Rosalie tensed, he added smoothly, "Small towns, my dear. News travels fast. I myself spent some time in Boston as a young man. Lovely city, though I prefer our mountain air." "As do I," Rosalie said carefully. Hargrove studied her with shrewd eyes. "Well, Miss Sinclair, I hope you'll find Willow Creek to your liking. We're a growing community with opportunities for those willing to work hard and contribute. Should you require banking services, my door is always open." "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove." After the banker departed, Samuel guided Rosalie back toward the sheriff's office. "Hargrove's influential," he told her. "Having him treat you cordially in public will go a long way toward changing other minds in town." "You orchestrated this," Rosalie realized. "This wasn't just lunch and a tour. You were deliberately introducing me to people who could help establish my reputation." Samuel didn't deny it. "Everyone needs allies, Rosalie. I'm just helping you find yours." "Why?" she pressed. "Why go to such lengths for a stranger?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Because I know what it's like to be judged based on rumors and half-truths. When I first came to Willow Creek, I was just another drifter with a gun and nightmares from the war. People were quick to assume the worst. It took time to prove myself." Rosalie's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "And you think I deserve the same chance?" "I think everyone does," he said simply. "Besides, you've already made more progress with those files in one morning than I have in years. That alone has earned you my gratitude." Back at the sheriff's office, they found Caleb dealing with a dispute between two merchants over delivery rights. While Samuel stepped in to mediate, Rosalie returned to her sorting task, her mind still processing the events of the afternoon. Samuel Evans was an enigma-stern lawman one moment, kind ally the next. She had come to Willow Creek seeking anonymity and a fresh start, not entanglement with the local sheriff. Yet here she was, increasingly drawn to a man who seemed determined to champion her cause. It was dangerous. If when her past caught up with her, anyone associated with her would be tainted by association. She couldn't allow Samuel to risk his reputation, his position in the community, for her sake. Yet as she watched him patiently resolving the merchant's dispute, his deep voice calm and reasonable, Rosalie couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she might find not just refuge but belonging in this rugged frontier town. That hope, fragile as it was, would have to be enough for now. The week passed in a blur of papers, dust, and gradual progress. By Friday, Rosalie had established a working filing system, cleared the backlog of correspondence, and even created a ledger for tracking expenses related to the sheriff's office. Samuel was impressed, frequently commenting on the transformation of the once chaotic space. Working alongside Samuel and occasionally Caleb, Rosalie began to feel almost at home in the sheriff's office. The routine provided structure to her days, and the work itself was satisfying in its orderliness. Each evening, she returned to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house tired but content. The other boarders had warmed to her somewhat, especially after Mr. Jenkins discovered she could play chess. Their evening games became a regular occurrence, with Miss Wells and Mr. Ford often watching and offering unsolicited advice to both players. On Saturday morning, Rosalie arrived at the sheriff's office to find Samuel strapping on his gun belt, a concerned expression on his face. "There's been trouble at the Lazy S Ranch," he explained when she inquired. A confrontation between ranch hands and some men claiming to be surveyors for the railroad. Caleb's already ridden out there, but I need to join him. Of course, Rosalie said. Is there anything I can do? Samuel hesitated. Actually, yes. I was expecting a telegram from the territorial marshal's office today. If it arrives, could you read it and send a response if necessary? The forms are in the top drawer. Rosalie nodded. I can manage that. Thank you. He donned his hat and headed for the door, then paused. Rosalie. If I'm not back by sundown, lock up and go straight to the boarding house. Don't linger in town alone after dark. The seriousness of his tone alarmed her. Are you expecting trouble? No, he said quickly. Just a precaution. These railroad disputes can get heated, and sometimes people look to take out their frustrations in town afterward. After Samuel left, Rosalie busied herself with the remaining filing, trying not to worry. Violence was a fact of life in the West, she knew that intellectually, but the idea of Samuel riding into a potentially dangerous situation made her stomach knot with anxiety. Around noon, the telegraph operator, a wiry man named Simmons, delivered the expected message from the territorial marshal. Rosalie thanked him and unfolded the paper, scanning its contents. It was largely administrative information about a prisoner transfer scheduled for the following month, and a request for an update on the railroad situation. She composed a brief, professional response, explaining that Sheriff Evans was currently investigating a dispute and would provide a full report upon his return. After delivering it to the telegraph office, she returned to the sheriff's office to continue working. The afternoon stretched on with no sign of Samuel or Caleb. As the sun began to dip toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the main street, Rosalie's worry increased. She found herself glancing out the window every few minutes, hoping to see Samuel's tall figure approaching. Just as she was preparing to lock up for the day, the door burst open. Caleb stumbled in, his face smeared with dirt and blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "Deputy!" Rosalie rushed to help him to a chair. "What happened? Where's the sheriff?" "Ambush," Caleb gasped, wincing as he sat. "We separated to talk to different groups. I was with the ranch hands when I heard shooting from where the sheriff went to meet the surveyors." He took a shaky breath. "By the time I got there, 2 of the men were down and the others had the sheriff. They took him, Miss Sinclair." Ice flooded Rosalie's veins. "Took him? What do you mean?" "Kidnapped him," Caleb clarified, his young face grim. "They weren't railroad men at all. I recognized one of them, Jeb Miller. He rode with the Blackwell gang before going solo. Sheriff put his brother in prison last year." "This is revenge, then," Rosalie said, her mind racing. "Have you organized a search party?" Caleb nodded, then winced again. "Mr. Taylor and some of his ranch hands are tracking them. I came back to get more men and supplies." He stood, swaying slightly. "I need to find Judge Hamilton. He can deputize some townsmen." "You need medical attention first," Rosalie insisted. "You're no good to the sheriff injured." Reluctantly, Caleb allowed her to clean and bandage his wound using the small medical kit Samuel kept in his desk. As she worked, Rosalie asked questions, trying to piece together what had happened and where Samuel might have been taken. "They were headed east toward the Badlands," Caleb told her. "Not much out that way except abandoned mining camps and rough country. Makes it hard to track." "How many men took him?" "4 that I saw, maybe more waiting elsewhere. And the sheriff, was he?" Rosalie couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "He was alive," Caleb assured her. "Knocked out, but alive. They want him that way, I reckon." Men like Miller, they don't just want revenge, they want the satisfaction of seeing it happen. Once Caleb's wound was dressed, he left to find the judge and organize more searchers. Rosalie paced the small office, her mind churning with fear and a growing determination. She couldn't just wait here, helpless, while Samuel was in danger. An idea formed in her mind, reckless, perhaps, but possible. She knew where Mrs. Peterson kept a spare horse for errands. She had ridden as a girl in Boston, though side saddle in a park was hardly preparation for the Montana wilderness. Still, she was reasonably sure she could follow a group of riders if their trail was clear enough. But first, she needed information, more specific details about where Samuel might have been taken. Caleb had mentioned abandoned mining camps. The sheriff's office would have maps, surely. After some searching, Rosalie found what she was looking for: a detailed map of the county, including markers for mining operations, active and defunct. Several abandoned camps were noted in the Badlands east of town. One in particular caught her eye: Ghost Creek Mine, situated in a narrow canyon that would be easily defensible. If she were planning to hold a prisoner, that's where she would go. Decision made, Rosalie gathered supplies: a canteen of water, some jerky from Samuel's desk drawer, a small knife, and after a moment's hesitation, the spare revolver she knew he kept in the bottom drawer. She had never fired a gun but understood the basic principle. It might at least serve as a deterrent. Night had fallen by the time she slipped out the back door of the sheriff's office, making her way through shadows to the Peterson property. The horse, a steady-looking bay gelding, nickered softly as she approached the small stable. Rosalie whispered reassurances as she saddled him, grateful for the full moon that provided enough light to work by. Leading the horse a safe distance from town before mounting, Rosalie oriented herself using the stars and the looming silhouette of Eagle Mountain to the north. East would take her toward the Badlands. With a silent prayer for courage and a last look at the twinkling lights of Willow Creek, she nudged the horse forward into the darkness. The terrain grew increasingly rough as Rosalie rode eastward, the rolling grasslands giving way to stark outcroppings of rock and deep ravines. The moonlight cast eerie shadows, transforming familiar shapes into menacing silhouettes. Every sound, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, made her jump. She had been riding for perhaps 2 hours when she spotted the glow of a campfire in the distance, nestled in what appeared to be the entrance to a canyon. Dismounting, Rosalie tethered the horse to a scrubby juniper and continued on foot, moving as quietly as her city-bred instincts allowed. As she drew closer, voices carried on the night air: men laughing, the clink of bottles, snippets of conversation. Keeping low, Rosalie crept from shadow to shadow until she could make out the scene. 4 men sat around the fire, passing a bottle between them. A 5th figure, Samuel, was slumped against a boulder, his hands bound behind him, his head hanging forward. Even from a distance, Rosalie could see blood matting his dark hair. Anger surged through her, hot and fierce. These men had hurt him, might even be planning to kill him. She needed to act, but how? She was one woman against 4 armed outlaws. Stealth and surprise would be her only advantages. But first, she needed to know if Samuel was conscious, capable of helping himself if given the opportunity. As if in answer to her unspoken question, Samuel's head lifted slightly. In the firelight, she could see his face, bruised but alert, his eyes scanning his surroundings, assessing. Always the lawman, even in captivity. Rosalie's heart leapt. He was awake, aware. Now she needed a diversion, something to draw the outlaws away long enough to free him. The answer came in the form of their horses, tethered on the far side of the camp. If she could startle them, create chaos. Circling wide around the camp, Rosalie approached the horses from downwind. There were 5 of them, presumably 1 for each outlaw and a spare for their prisoner. They shifted nervously as she drew near, sensing a stranger. Taking a deep breath, Rosalie raised the revolver and fired into the air. The shot echoed through the canyon like thunder. Immediately, she slapped the nearest horse on its flank, hard. It reared with a terrified whinny, pulling free of its tether and bolting. The other horses, panicked by the gunshot and their companion's flight, followed suit, stampeding away from the camp. Chaos erupted among the outlaws. 3 of them scrambled to their feet, shouting and cursing as they ran after the fleeing horses. The 4th, a burly man with a beard, stayed behind, drawing his gun and moving toward Samuel. "Who's out there?" he bellowed. "Show yourself or the sheriff gets a bullet." Rosalie's blood ran cold. This wasn't going according to plan. She had hoped they would all pursue the horses, leaving Samuel unguarded. From her position behind a boulder, she could see Samuel working at his bonds, using the distraction to his advantage. His eyes met hers across the distance. He had spotted her. A slight shake of his head warned her to stay hidden. The bearded man pressed his gun to Samuel's temple. "I said show yourself." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Miller," Samuel said calmly, despite the weapon at his head. "That's a territorial marshal out there with a dozen deputies. They've had you surrounded for hours." Miller hesitated, his eyes darting around the darkness beyond the firelight. "You're lying." "Am I? Why do you think I let you take me so easily? We've been tracking your gang for months. This was the perfect opportunity to catch you all together." It was a bluff, a desperate one, but delivered with such conviction that even Rosalie almost believed it. Miller took a half step back, uncertainty evident in his posture. In that moment of hesitation, Samuel made his move. Having worked one hand free of his bonds, he lunged upward, knocking Miller's gun aside. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ground as the 2 men grappled. Rosalie didn't wait to see the outcome. Racing toward the camp, she aimed for the fallen gun. Miller saw her coming and kicked the weapon away, then slammed his fist into Samuel's jaw, momentarily stunning him. "A woman," Miller laughed, reaching for a knife at his belt. "This is your rescue party, Sheriff. One little lady." Rosalie raised the revolver, both hands gripping it to steady her aim. "Step away from him." Miller's eyes narrowed, assessing the threat. "You even know how to use that thing, sweetheart?" "I'm a quick study," Rosalie replied, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. "And at this distance, I doubt I'd miss." Samuel had recovered enough to regain his footing. With his hands still partially bound, he was at a disadvantage, but his eyes were clear and focused. "It's over, Miller. My deputy knows where you took me. More men will be coming." "Then I've got nothing to lose, do I?" Miller snarled, lunging toward Samuel with the knife. Rosalie fired. The recoil nearly knocked the gun from her grasp, and the sound deafened her momentarily. Miller stumbled, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had struck. It wasn't a killing shot, but it was enough to halt his attack. Samuel seized the opportunity, driving his shoulder into Miller's midsection and sending them both to the ground. Despite his bound hands, Samuel managed to deliver a solid blow to Miller's jaw, rendering the outlaw unconscious. For a moment, there was only the sound of their labored breathing and the crackling of the fire. Then Samuel looked up at Rosalie, his expression a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and concern. "Rosalie," he said hoarsely, "what in God's name are you doing here?" She lowered the gun, suddenly lightheaded with relief. "Rescuing you, apparently." Samuel shook his head, a reluctant smile forming. "So you are. Would you mind untying me before his friends return?" Rosalie hurried to his side, using Miller's dropped knife to cut through the remaining ropes binding Samuel's wrists. As soon as he was free, Samuel checked Miller for other weapons, then used the same ropes to bind the unconscious outlaw. "We need to move," he said urgently. "The others will be back once they realize they've been tricked." He eyed Rosalie with renewed concern. "Did you come alone? Where's your horse?" "This way." She led him to where she had left the bay gelding. "I heard what happened from Caleb. I couldn't just wait in town, not knowing if you were alive or—" Her voice broke, the enormity of the situation finally hitting her. Samuel caught her arm, steadying her. "Hey," he said softly, "I'm all right, thanks to you." "I shot a man," Rosalie whispered, the reality of it sinking in. "You saved my life," Samuel corrected her. "Miller wouldn't have hesitated to kill us both." He squeezed her arm gently. "But we can talk about this later. Right now, we need to get to safety." They mounted the horse together, Samuel in front with Rosalie behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. As they rode away from the canyon, Rosalie could hear distant shouts, the other outlaws returning to find their leader captured and their prisoner gone. "They'll pursue us," Samuel said grimly. "The horse can't outrun them with both of us riding. We need to find a defensible position." "What about the Ghost Creek mine?" Rosalie suggested. "It's nearby, according to the map I saw. We could hide there until help arrives." Samuel twisted to look at her in surprise. "You studied the maps before coming after me." "I wanted to be prepared," she said simply. A slow smile spread across his face. "Rosalie Sinclair, you are a remarkable woman." The warmth in his voice sent a flutter through her chest, momentarily distracting her from their perilous situation. But the sound of hoofbeats in the distance quickly refocused her attention. "The mine," she pressed. Samuel nodded. "It's our best option. Hold tight." He urged the horse into a gallop, following a faint trail that wound through the rocky terrain. The entrance to Ghost Creek Mine loomed ahead, a dark maw in the side of a cliff, partially obscured by fallen timber and years of neglect. Dismounting quickly, Samuel led the horse into the mine entrance, then helped Rosalie down. The interior was pitch black beyond the reach of the moonlight. "There should be old mining lanterns inside," Samuel said. "Stay close to me." They ventured deeper, Samuel feeling his way along the wall until his hand encountered a metal object. A moment of rummaging produced a match from his pocket, and soon a lantern cast its warm glow around them. The mine tunnel extended about 30 feet before widening into a larger chamber where equipment had once been stored. Rusted tools and broken crates littered the floor, but the supporting timbers appeared sound. "This will do," Samuel decided. "We can see anyone approaching, and the entrance is narrow enough to defend." Rosalie sank onto a crate, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. The events of the night, the fear, the desperate rescue, the shot she had fired, all crashed over her like a wave. Samuel knelt before her, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Just tired, and processing everything." "I can't believe you came after me alone," he said, his voice a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" "Of course I do," Rosalie replied, lifting her chin. "But I couldn't bear the thought of you in their hands, possibly dying while I did nothing." Samuel's expression softened. "Why risk yourself for me, Rosalie? You barely know me." "I know enough," she said quietly. "I know you're a good man who defended me when no one else would. I know you gave me a chance when others judged me based on rumors. I know." She hesitated, then continued more softly. "I know that when I'm with you, I feel safe for the first time in months. I couldn't lose that. I couldn't lose you." The confession hung in the air between them, more revealing than she had intended. Samuel reached up, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Rosalie," he began, his voice deep and tender. The moment was shattered by the sound of voices outside the mine entrance. Samuel was on his feet instantly, drawing his recovered gun. "Stay back," he whispered. "If they find us, run deeper into the mine. There might be another exit." Rosalie stood, gripping the revolver she still carried. "I'm not leaving you." Before Samuel could argue, a familiar voice called from outside. "Sheriff, Miss Sinclair, are you in there?" Relief flooded through them both. "Caleb," Samuel called back. "We're here. Is it clear out there?" "All clear," Caleb confirmed. "We caught the other three trying to round up their horses. Judge Hamilton's deputized half the town, and Mr. Taylor's men are with me." Stepping out of the mine into the pale light of dawn, Rosalie saw at least a dozen men on horseback, including Caleb and several faces she recognized from town. Among them was Mayor Hargrove, looking decidedly out of place in his fine coat. "Sheriff Evans," the mayor greeted them. "Miss Sinclair, when Deputy Reynolds told us you had both gone missing, we feared the worst." "Miss Sinclair rescued me from Miller and his gang," Samuel explained, his hand coming to rest supportively at the small of Rosalie's back. "She tracked them to their camp, created a diversion, and shot Miller when he attacked." The assembled men stared at Rosalie with newfound respect and, in some cases, disbelief. "You shot Jeb Miller?" one of the ranch hands asked. Rosalie nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. "In the shoulder. I didn't want to kill him." Mayor Hargrove's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Well, Miss Sinclair, it seems Willow Creek owes you a debt of gratitude. Our sheriff is well respected and would have been sorely missed." The ride back to town was slow but triumphant. Miller and his gang, bound and under heavy guard, led the procession, followed by Samuel and Rosalie sharing a horse provided by one of the search party. The sun had fully risen by the time they reached Willow Creek, where it seemed the entire town had gathered to witness their return. Mrs. Peterson rushed forward when she saw Rosalie, enveloping her in a motherly embrace. "When I discovered my horse missing and your bed empty, I was beside myself with worry. What were you thinking, child?" "I'm sorry for taking your horse without permission," Rosalie apologized. "I'll work to repay you." "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "The horse is the least of my concerns. You could have been killed." "But she wasn't," Samuel interjected, dismounting beside them. "Instead, she saved my life and helped capture one of the most wanted men in the territory." The news spread through the crowd like wildfire. People who had been cool or outright hostile to Rosalie just days before now pressed forward to shake her hand or pat her shoulder. Clara from the cafe declared she would name a pie after her. Even Mrs. Wallace from the dress shop offered a grudging nod of acknowledgement. By the time Rosalie reached the boarding house, exhaustion had completely overtaken her. She barely managed to wash the dust from her face before collapsing onto her bed, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to late afternoon sunlight and the distant sound of piano music drifting up from the parlor. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Had the previous night been a dream? But the soreness in her muscles and the lingering smell of gunpowder on her hands confirmed the reality of her adventure. After changing into a fresh dress and arranging her hair, Rosalie descended to find the boarding house parlor transformed. Flowers adorned every surface, and a small crowd of people mingled, drinking punch and nibbling on cookies. Mrs. Peterson spotted her on the stairs and hurried over. "There she is, our heroine," the landlady announced, drawing all eyes to Rosalie. "We've organized a little celebration in your honor, dear. The whole town's talking about your bravery." "This really isn't necessary," Rosalie protested, embarrassed by the attention. "Perhaps not," said a familiar voice, "but it is well deserved." Samuel stood by the fireplace, cleaned up and dressed in a fresh shirt, though a bruise still darkened his jaw. Their eyes met across the room, and something warm and significant passed between them. The next hour was a blur of introductions and congratulations. People who had snubbed her days earlier now claimed They had always seen something special in her. Mayor Hargrove announced that the town council would be presenting her with a commendation at their next meeting. Even the telegraph operator, Simmons, approached to shake her hand. "Sent a wire to the territorial marshal about what you did," he told her. "Expect there'll be a reward for helping capture Miller." Through it all, Samuel remained nearby, his presence a steady anchor in the swirl of sudden adulation. When he finally made his way to her side, Rosalie felt a sense of rightness settle over her. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "Overwhelmed," she admitted. "Yesterday I was the scandalous Eastern woman no one wanted in town. Today I'm apparently a folk hero." Samuel chuckled. "People are fickle, but in this case their change of heart is justified. You did something extraordinary, Rosalie." "I was terrified the entire time," she confessed. "That makes it all the more brave," he said, his eyes warm with admiration. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." A commotion at the front door interrupted their conversation. Deputy Caleb burst in, waving a telegram. "Sheriff, important news from Boston." The room fell silent. Rosalie froze, her heart stuttering in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been dreading since her arrival. Her past had finally caught up with her. Samuel moved protectively closer to her side. "What is it, Caleb?" The young deputy scanned the telegram, then looked up with a broad grin. "They've arrested Harold Sinclair for embezzlement and fraud. His confession clears Miss Sinclair of all suspicion of involvement in his schemes." Murmurs rippled through the gathering as people processed this information. Rosalie swayed on her feet, light-headed with shock. Samuel's arm came around her waist, steadying her. "Harold confessed," she whispered. "According to this, he provided a signed statement exonerating you completely," Caleb confirmed. "The Boston authorities send their apologies for any hardship caused by the unfounded accusations against you." Relief washed over Rosalie in dizzying waves. The scandal that had driven her from her home, the whispers that had followed her westward, all based on her father's crimes, which he had initially tried to blame on her. She had fled not from guilt but from the shame and betrayal, unable to face a society that had so quickly turned against her. And now, vindication. Freedom from the shadow that had hung over her since that terrible day when the authorities had first come to their home. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked softly, his arm still supporting her. "Yes," Rosalie said, and for the first time in months she meant it. "I am." Later, after the impromptu celebration had wound down and most guests had departed, Rosalie and Samuel sat together on the boarding house porch. The evening air was cool but pleasant, scented with Mrs. Peterson's roses that climbed the trellis beside them. "So," Samuel said, breaking a comfortable silence, "your father tried to implicate you in his financial crimes." It wasn't a question, but Rosalie nodded anyway. "When the investment scheme collapsed and his clients demanded their money, he panicked. Claimed I had helped manage the books, that I had orchestrated the fraud. No one believed him at first. I was just his daughter, after all, but then documents appeared with what looked like my signature." "Forgeries," Samuel surmised. "Yes, though I couldn't prove it at the time. When the scandal broke, Boston society was only too eager to believe the worst. Old friends crossed the street to avoid me. My fiancé broke our engagement publicly and humiliatingly." She paused, the memories still painful despite her vindication. "I couldn't stay. So you came west, as far from Boston as you could get." "I had a distant cousin who had settled in Helena," Rosalie explained. "I wrote to her, but when I arrived, I learned she had moved on to Oregon. With my funds dwindling, I decided to try a smaller town where I might find work and anonymity." "And instead, you found Willow Creek," Samuel said, a smile in his voice. "And you," Rosalie added softly, The one person who was willing to welcome me despite the rumors. Samuel's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his fingers warm and strong as they intertwined with her own. "I'm glad you found us," he said, "though I could have done without the kidnapping and gunfight." Rosalie laughed, the sound free and unrestrained. "It does seem I brought some excitement to your quiet town." "You brought much more than that," Samuel said, his tone turning serious. He shifted to face her more directly. "Rosalie, I know you came here seeking a fresh start, and I don't want to presume." "Presume what?" she prompted when he hesitated. "That you might consider making Willow Creek more than just a temporary refuge." His gray eyes searched hers in the fading light. "That you might consider staying permanently." Rosalie's heart quickened. "Are you asking me to stay for the town's benefit, Sheriff Evans, or for your own?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Both, Miss Sinclair, definitely both." He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I've never met anyone like you, brave enough to chase down outlaws, compassionate enough to spare them when you could have killed, intelligent enough to organize my disaster of an office in a matter of days." "You make me sound quite impressive," Rosalie said, breathless from his touch and his words. "You are impressive," Samuel insisted. "And I find myself thinking about you far more than is professionally appropriate for a sheriff regarding his temporary assistant." Hope bloomed in Rosalie's chest, bright and warm. "And how does a man think about a woman when it's not professional at all?" Samuel's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jawline. "He thinks about her smile and how it lights up a room. He thinks about her courage and how it inspires his own. He thinks about her lips." His gaze dropped to her mouth, the intensity in his eyes making her breath catch. "And what does he think about her lips?" Rosalie whispered. "He thinks about how much he wants to kiss them," Samuel murmured, leaning closer. "May I, Rosalie?" In answer, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with shared longing. Samuel's arm wrapped around her waist, drawing her closer as her hands found their way to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been waiting to do that since you first walked into my office." "Even when I was just the scandalous Eastern woman," Rosalie teased. "Especially then," he admitted with a chuckle. "There's something particularly appealing about a woman with secrets." "Well, now my secrets are revealed," she said, "and I'm just Rosalie." Samuel shook his head, drawing back to look into her eyes. "You could never be just anything, Rosalie Sinclair. You're extraordinary, and if you'll give me the chance, I'd like to court you properly." Joy bubbled up within her, effervescent and bright. "I think I'd like that very much, Samuel Evans." His smile was answer enough, but he sealed the promise with another kiss, this one gentle and sweet, full of possibility. On the porch of a boarding house in a small Montana town, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rosalie Sinclair found herself welcoming not just a new beginning, but a future brighter than any she could have imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach just 1 week before. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Rosalie stood at the back of Willow Creek's small church, a bouquet of wildflowers clutched in her trembling hands. The building was filled to capacity, townspeople crowded into the pews and standing along the walls. At the altar, Samuel waited, handsome in his best suit, his eyes fixed on the doorway where she stood. Their courtship had progressed swiftly but naturally, their shared experiences forging a bond that deepened with each passing day. Rosalie had continued working at the sheriff's office, her temporary position becoming permanent as her organizational skills proved invaluable. In the evenings, Samuel would escort her on walks through town, to dinners at Clara's Cafe, to community dances where they barely left each other's side. 2 weeks ago, during a picnic in the meadow outside town, he had knelt before her and asked her to be his wife. Her acceptance had been immediate and joyful. Now, as the small church orchestra began playing the wedding march, Rosalie took her first step toward her future. Mayor Hargrove, who had offered to give her away in the absence of family, patted her hand where it rested on his arm. "Ready, my dear?" he asked kindly. "More than ready," Rosalie replied, her eyes never leaving Samuel's. The walk down the aisle seemed both eternal and instantaneous. Then she was beside him, his hand taking hers, his smile warming her from within. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "You clean up rather well yourself, Sheriff," she whispered back, earning a quiet chuckle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, respect, and partnership. When Samuel slipped the gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, sent from his family in Pennsylvania, Rosalie felt the last pieces of her heart, so long guarded, finally open completely. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Samuel didn't hesitate, gathering Rosalie into his arms and kissing her with a tenderness that belied the strength of his embrace. The church erupted in applause and cheers, led enthusiastically by Deputy Caleb and Mrs. Peterson. The celebration that followed at the newly built town hall lasted well into the evening. Everyone in Willow Creek attended, even Mrs. Wallace, who had eventually come around to acceptance of the Eastern woman who had captured their sheriff's heart. There was dancing and feasting, speeches and toasts, laughter and a few happy tears. As the night grew late, Samuel led Rosalie away from the festivities toward the small house they would share, a cozy structure on the edge of town that they had spent weeks preparing together. "Mrs. Evans," Samuel said, savoring the name as they reached the front porch. "Welcome home." Before Rosalie could respond, he swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold into their new life together. 5 years later, Rosalie sat on the front porch of their expanded home, watching as Samuel taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, how to properly hold a fishing rod. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played at Rosalie's feet with a set of wooden blocks, occasionally looking up to gift her mother with a toothy grin. The years had been kind to the Evans family. Samuel continued to serve as sheriff, respected throughout the territory for his fairness and integrity. Rosalie had taken over as editor of the Willow Creek Gazette when old Thompson finally retired, transforming the small newspaper into a voice for the growing community. Their children were healthy and happy, surrounded by an extended family of townspeople who had come to love the once unwelcome newcomer as one of their own. Willow Creek itself had prospered, the railroad finally reaching the town 2 years prior, bringing new opportunities and growth. Mayor Hargrove had convinced Rosalie to run for the town council, where her intelligence and progressive ideas had helped guide Willow Creek's development with an eye toward the approaching new century. As Samuel looked up from his fishing lesson to meet Rosalie's gaze, his smile still made her heart skip, just as it had that first day in the general store. He said something to Thomas, then crossed the yard to join her on the porch. "What are you thinking about, looking so thoughtful?" he asked, settling beside her. "About the day I arrived in Willow Creek," Rosalie replied. "How everyone said I wasn't welcome." "Except me," Samuel reminded her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Except you," she agreed, leaning into his embrace. "You welcomed me yourself, against everyone's advice." "Best decision I ever made," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. From the yard, Thomas called for his father's attention, proudly demonstrating his casting technique. Elizabeth abandoned her blocks to toddle toward her brother, determined not to be left out. "They say the Jenkins place might be for sale soon," Samuel mentioned casually. "It has that big apple orchard you've always admired, and plenty of room for more children, should we be so blessed." Rosalie smiled, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "We might need that extra room sooner than you think." Samuel's eyes widened. "Are you?" "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday," Rosalie said, joy bubbling in her voice. "Come spring, there will be another Evans in Willow Creek." Samuel's whoop of delight startled the children, who looked up to see their father lifting their mother from her chair and spinning her around on the porch. Their laughter joined his, creating a symphony of family happiness that carried across the yard and into the golden Montana sunset. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Samuel and Rosalie lay together in their bed, his hand resting protectively over the new life growing within her. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming west, staying in Willow Creek?" Rosalie turned to face him, tracing the lines of his beloved face with gentle fingers. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "Everything that led me here, even the painful parts, brought me to you, to our children, to this life we've built together." "When I said I'd welcome you myself that day," Samuel murmured, "I had no idea how completely you would change my world." "For the better, I hope," Rosalie said with a smile. "For the infinitely better," he assured her, gathering her close. "I love you, Rosalie Evans. Yesterday, today, and for all our tomorrows." "And I love you," she whispered against his lips. "My sheriff, my champion, my home." As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Rosalie reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. From the frightened young woman fleeing scandal to the confident wife, mother, and community leader she had become, it was a transformation she could never have imagined on that dusty day when she first arrived in Willow Creek. They had said she wasn't welcome. But Samuel Evans had welcomed her himself, and in doing so he had given her not just refuge but a place to belong, a love to cherish, and a future filled with promise. It was more than enough. It was everything,